right. Good morning. Welcome to the Standardization Brigade meeting of September 3rd. This meeting is being recorded uh, and will be posted to YouTube later. So please, if you will, identify yourself in the chat by doing add here, and that will register your attendance in the notes. As always, the notes are kind of pulled from the group chat. So if you want to add something to the notes, just do an add item and it will be added to the notes. I should be sharing the Stabilization Brigade's agenda for today. I see Zach on there, assuming people can see it.
Yeah, I can see it, David.
All right. Topic, review action items. There are two action items from last week's meeting. The first one was by Mitt, and he was going to follow up about the new event patch sets. He did follow up an email, and I'll add that to the minutes later. The patch sets that he identified, there were two, I believe, that needed to be merged in order to get the new definition, new event definition in. Doing some minutes here. Notes. The second action item was for everyone, and that was the review of the documentation that explains how tests are set up and how to integrate new tests. Anybody have any comments on that based on their review? Okay. Test documentation. I'm going to actually take that as most people didn't get a chance to look at it. Please do get a chance to look at that so that we can get any additions, changes into them that make sense. Carried over from last week is the coding standards. Zach put together a document that is linked here. And as you can see, there's been some activity back and forth on these coding standards. Please review this documentation. If you're not speaking, if you could go on mute, that'd be helpful. Thank you. So please take some time to review this document, add comments to that. Zach, is there anything you would like to share about this document this morning?
I can go over it quickly if you'd like that.
That would be great. Thanks. Want me to give you the share?
No, you can just yeah. There's
Okay.
more trouble. So when I came to this, I find trying to decide how things are tested and what developers sort of should expect from their tests is sometimes unclear. And so I sort of went through and made it a list of requirements, sort of off the cuff, but then tried to formalize it. So you'll notice that I color coded whether things have been done and whether they're fully applied across the entire code base. Just to go through some of the requirements. The first one was the code has to be licensed properly. This seems like a no-brainer, but we have requirements that we're using correct licensing and that we're not copying things properly. There's also some guidelines that we update about how to include or copy code. If you are, for example, need to include a library or something like that, and to make sure that that licensing is correct. We have some automated tooling that we're exploring for doing those checks. Whether that's able to be integrated as a part of the patch review process or if that has to happen after depends on how fast the tooling is. Currently, we have some tests that test for code copying and other stuff, but they take too long. They're taking on the order of half an hour or 45 minutes to run to completion, and that means that you're holding up on a fairly opaque test, which we don't really want to do. So the next requirement was that code has to pass through a code review process. We currently have Garrett doing this. There's a comment, I think, made by Matteo about not plus twoing our own code. That's something that we should probably explore with the community. In some cases, like for tests and certain other things that are that seem pretty obvious, it makes sense. And sometimes we just have a dearth of, we don't have enough people who can plus two things. That might need to be addressed administratively. Those two seem pretty straightforward. And the further down the list we get, the more abstract things get. So the third item was that code should pass the lint and style checks. Usually these are things that just check for good formatting, like in Go, there's Go format, and Python, there are a few other tools we've used. Flakegate is one. There's something called Black, which works more like Go format in that it formats to a specific style guide. We should decide what we want to run and how formally we want to enforce these. And there's also some other style conventions, the way that we name things, that sort of thing that needs to help be defined, that we currently don't have like a style guide. Fourth item was unit tests must exist and be run as part of code acceptance. Right now, there's not a lot of great unit test coverage. We do report it well. If you look in Jenkins and you look at one of the repos, you'll see that Jenkins will report code coverage and number of tests passed and those sorts of things. So that's important, and we should think about trying to get that up and getting that to a reasonable level of coverage. The fifth item was documentation. Right now, documentation is kind of spread around places. It's in the wiki, it's in documents people wrote. It's not really published in the general area, and I'm somewhat focused on this, getting a better way of getting our code published, or code documentation published. And the last two items, interfaces are well defined, and logging is a user interface. Right now, we don't have things are being done sort of ad hoc. We have a lot of things that are coming into being because they're part of a gRPC interface. It would be useful to have those interfaces be really well defined, and especially anytime there's a user interface that people touch. So command line interfaces, any of the web interfaces that we have that explained and documented well. And for logging, one of the problems that we've had in the past has been people formatting logs in unusual ways, or ways that are not aligning with the exact, with other components. So for example, we had an issue where in one part of the code, packet dumps were being done in hexadecimal, and another part, they were being done in decimal format, which made it hard to compare and to interpret some of those log messages. Also, things like name of the device or serial number of the device might have been reported as device serial and not differentiate between whether it's like an ONU or an OLT, which made it hard looking at a log because you'd get a field that was like serial number, but without context, you wouldn't know, and without looking at who created that log message, you wouldn't know whether it was an OLT or an ONU. Which made things somewhat confusing to read. So beyond this, I went and did a gap analysis that talked about, for each of these items that isn't complete, what we need to do to get there. So I could use some input there on how to sort of close these gaps in coding standards. I could also use some help for the specific languages for Go and Python and any other tools or any other languages we use. If people have input on what they feel strongly about coding style or other standards. So that's basically it. Are there any other questions?
So just a question and sort of a comment embedded in the question, but what is the future of Python within the work we're doing? What time frame will we be moving away from the Python OpenONU adapter, and what other Python components, if any, are we going to keep? I just wonder how much effort we need to expend on Python coding standards if soon we may be moved away from it, or maybe it's going to be to stick around longer.
Where did I put that crystal ball? I I don't think we should necessarily say we're going to move away from any language. One of the elegant bits of microservices is you can choose the right language for the right tool at the right time. So I would have to assume that for the foreseeable future, there will be some amount of Python around. I think that's got to be the safe assumption. And if not in our specific tool sets, I suspect within the ONF environment will be around quite a while so that we can leach tool chains between projects to do the formatting, do the linting, the static analysis. So I wouldn't say give up on Python yet. I think it might be part of the ecosystem going forward.
Yeah, well, certainly it's going to continue being part of CEBA because XOS is heavily Python involved, and we don't have plans to get rid of it anytime soon there. So we do have our own standards with that in that community. For example, Flake 8, I believe, instead of Black. Some of the questions Zach raised in here, I think we have positions on already with respect to Python. Maybe we could look into adopting that as a standard across projects then.
Yeah, I would say if there's tools already in the tool chain and those are working, that it makes sense to adopt those rather than have to, go out and do something different just because we can. Anything else? All right. Thank you, Zach. If there's no other questions on that, we'll go back to the agenda. The next item on the agenda was working group status. Working group status. As you know, there have been some focus groups or working group that have been created to focus on come up with some proposals around testing, come up with some proposals around some of the coding standards, which is where some of Zach's work kind of got its initial push. And there's one other kind of general direction one, I guess we'll call it that. I just want to leave this time in the agenda for people that are working on those groups, if they have anything they wanted to speak about, bring up to the larger group, now's the time to do so. So I'll open the floor for that.
Hi, Kirill here. Just one note is we have quite a good turnout in this meeting, but it would be nice to see a bit more of a turnout to the focus group. I think majority or most people that join these meetings are also invited to the focus group sessions. So please, if you can find time when you can join these, that would be great because we would really appreciate your input.
are those focus group meetings, are they on the ONF calendar, or how can people find out about them?
I've sent them out directly. I've just collected email addresses from the wiki for most people that have been attending the meetings. So I think nearly everyone should have had it in their mailbox. I don't know if I can set it up. I don't think I have permissions to set it up in the court calendar. So I've just been sending it out through a mailing list.
Any other comments? I know I did participate in one meeting last week where we started going over the JIRAs and started to differentiate what JIRAs really need to be included in the Stabilization Brigade. I found that very useful. One shift from that was originally at least when I was looking at this, I was thinking of productization versus, which is different than what we call stabilization. And so some of the original JIRAs I know I labeled as Stabilization Brigade are more about productization than stabilization. I think weeding some of that out, if you will help us focus on stabilization itself. So thanks for the work going on there.
And these meetings, they're going to continue to be weekly meetings. I think the last week one dropped back off of my calendar, but we are having it again this week, I assume.
They've been scheduled at this point in time as ad hoc meetings. We could make them into weekly meetings. But yes, we're starting with initial sessions. So there is a session on automated testing framework after the Volta Scrum VO meeting. And then we'll schedule a few more. And if we see that there is a need to have these as recurring, then we will set them up as recurring meetings.
Yeah, I was thinking specifically for last week's one where we got, a portion of the way through the JIRA stories, but certainly not all the way through. So we have not scheduled that again for this week. We'll wait to hear from you on time and whether it'll be continued.
That's right. So this week we have, today we have the automated testing framework session, and tomorrow we have coding standard session. So I thought that it might be too many if we scheduled one more. So potentially we'll look into maybe scheduling one next week, although it's ONF Connect. I need to see, but there will be a follow-up to the last week's session, absolutely.
Great, sounds good.
All right. Speaking of ONF Connect, next week's meeting will be canceled as ONF Connect will be going on. So I'm assuming most people will be involved there. If you're at ONF Connect, and hey, stop by, say hi, love to talk to people, and we can carry on with that. The week after the ONF Connect, the meetings will resume. The only other thing on the agenda today is I started to look at some statistics that we can start at least tracking weekly at these meetings. So I just put two of them out there. One is the number of open issues labeled stabilization. Currently that stands at about 50. That will go down as we do a better job of deciding what is a stabilization issue and what is not. Or it might go up as we find more bugs, but we'll keep tracking that. And then, as Zach referred to earlier, Jenkins does report code coverage. I couldn't log into Jenkins this morning for some reason, but I remembered from last week that the Volta Go project, I think, was about 20% code coverage for unit tests. So we'll track that as well. And as we work through the focus groups, we can figure out what is our target for some of that, as well as when it's appropriate to start maybe putting some gates in around
what do you,
sets.
What do you mean the 20% code coverage in the unit test?
So if you look at all the lines of active code in Volta Go, 20% of those are evaluated by the unit test today.
Okay.
I said, yeah.
I
Go
put a
ahead.
link in the chat that goes to that in the breakdown.
As Zach, when I was talking with Zach about this, it's important to call that as active code, which means the lines that are blank, lines that are comments are not included in that. So it is actual code. That number is low, in case you weren't aware of that. And certain modules or projects within Volta-Go have better coverage than others, but it does, at least in my mind, say we need better code coverage for our unit tests.
Yeah.
And again, I think we have to be careful that we don't want to just improve this number and not have unit tests that are actually valuable, because you got to be careful with any metric you're measuring. Sometimes the behavior you get is drives the metric in the right direction, but doesn't actually accomplish what you want to accomplish. So code coverage in of itself isn't going to necessarily get us anything.
And that's
it is a metric to watch.
Code coverage, not necessarily branch coverage, just lines of code coverage, right? The
Yes.
first step.
Yeah. In the link that Zach referenced, I think they do branch coverage there as well. But I thought it was. I'd have to go back to look at it. Branch coverage is yet another statistic, and again, I want to be careful that we don't work towards good statistics but useless tests. Would be my only caution.
Well, usually with 20%, you get the infrastructure in place, so that's a big step.
Yeah.
So I have a question, Zach, about the link. I noticed components that I believe are in Volta-Go that are not listed. Like I don't see API server there, the affinity router, and I don't see the RO core. Is it possible the report is omitting modules that have no tests in them, is only showing modules that do have tests?
It very well might be. I'd have to look at how the tests is invoked. It's using go test and then post-processing the results. So if there were no tests for a component, it may not report there.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's something for us to look into, because I expected more packages listed than this.
And if that's the case, that would mean our code coverage is actually less than 20%. All right. Are there any other?
So should it, like the OpenOOT adapter is not part of this, right?
This is just an example of code coverage. I'm going to be looking at how to summarize some of this, to be honest, so that we can understand trends, if you will. And so this project, I think the link that is only for Volta-Go. There would be other links for the other projects. That makes Sean?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other comments on this? All right. Any other agenda items people want to bring up? If not, we'll give people back, and I'm perfectly happy to do that.
I think I'm just wondering, again, right? So I did a query out all the JIRAs like you did. I think it's like 83 is on the category of the stabilization and 50 is still open, right?
Correct. Those are 50 open issues. So I based the query I did was essentially issues that were not resolved, done, or closed in the project Volta with the label stabilization.
Mm-hmm.
And that showed me 50 items.
So like you said, potentially the existing other open JIRAs, we probably at some point we need to review it and then see whether they need to be part of the civilization also, right?
And that is actually being done as part of the focus groups.
Okay.
So again, that may go down for that reason. It may go up for other reasons as we find new bugs. For instance, going into the failure scenarios, what happens when you pull a Kubernetes node? You start killing off containers. We might see more errors come up to this. I think part of the stabilization automated testing is going to have to come up with those more involved tests. So we'll see how that fluctuates over time. All right. If that's it, we'll close the meeting off. Appreciate everyone coming. Please take some time to review Garrett items for code reviews. So if there are outstanding patch sets, they don't stay outstanding. They actually get merged. So please take the time to do that even if you just take an hour a day, just go look at Garrett and review some things. All right. Thank you guys very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone.